Record keeping is one of the most critical aspects of building your candle empire, because how else are you going to know if your tests are going well, if your supplies are running out, and if that customer who comes back to you for a new candle wants the same fragrance? How are you going to find that out? So that's the topic of today's video. Let's hop in. Hello, my name is Kevin. Welcome back to Armatage Candle Company, the premier online resource for accelerating your candle making technique and business. In today's episode, we're talking about record keeping. So records are, in my opinion, one of the most important things you can do as a candle maker to keep your workshop straight. I've done everything from note cards to sticky notes to Excel spreadsheets to try to track everything from what I'm putting into these candles, what wicks I'm testing, what worked well with this wax and this wick and this fragrance and in this fragrance load. And it ends up looking like one of those diagrams where you're connecting all the yarn to different pins on the cork board. And it's like, what's even going on anymore? This thing is crazy and out of hand. So I took my melon, and in my professional life outside of candles, I tried to use the skill that I know, which is kind of nerdy, but like writing code, and built a tool called MoonLite. A few months ago, we launched to help solve this problem of aligning and tracking your different records. Because the worst thing that can happen is that you want to recreate some beautiful candle or know that a test went well or keep track of that standard test and you just lost it or you can't find it or you're duplicating all these things. You're just driving yourself crazy because you're losing all this productivity and time to record keeping that is complicated, complex, massive. You've got this database of stuff and you just can't keep it straight. So I want to show you around MoonLite, show you what it can do and how it solves this problem of record alignment. Let's do that now. One of the core tenets of any good record keeping and candle making is make sure you can track the design of your candle all the way down to the actual candle itself. So MoonLite is designed to be built from this place of you put these designs together, you create batches of those designs, and those batches have candles associated with them. So I'll show you what I mean. We'll start like we've never done anything in MoonLite before. And we're going to create a recipe. That's the first thing you're going to want to do. So when you go to create a new recipe, you can give it a name. We're going to call this Genesis. You can create a wax blend design. This can be any number of waxes. Specifically, you can put the percentages in. So let's do like a soy paraffin blend. One of my favorite blends is to use Nature Wax C3 with IGI 4627. I'm going to update the blend weights because I use 25% C3 and 75% IGI 4627. A fragrance load to start with, we'll go 5%. And we're going to use a fragrance called Sunset Valley. It's not a real fragrance. But if we wanted to blend fragrances, we could do something like Beach House. And I'll blend them equally, 50-50. Now this is the design, so we don't actually say how much of that is. We just know that no matter how many candles we want to make with this design, it's going to be a 50-50 split. This is a container candle. We're going to put it in our amber jar, 8 ounce. And in that capacity, we know it can hold 204 grams. I could have put 8 ounces. This design includes a wick, and it's a double wick. And it's a double Eco 2 wick. And we're not going to add any color, and we're not going to add it to a collection, but those are both things that we can do in MoonLite. So now that we've created this recipe, this is the design of the candle, everything we do from here allows us to be more creative with what we're doing. But at the basis of it, we can see that this recipe calls for 2 waxes, 2 fragrance oils, a 5% fragrance load, a specific container that we have, and a specific double wick that we have. The next thing to do when you have a recipe is to create a batch. We actually want to use the recipe, so we're going to create a batch. We can do that by clicking New Batch, and we can name it, but it will get a name on its own. I'm going to leave it alone just to keep it organized. And we're going to create a batch size of 4 different candles. Now, you'll notice that this recipe already comes with a number, and our batch will also be assigned a number. And that helps solve this problem of how do I know how to track what IDs to use with what candles. And MoonLite automatically creates unique identifiers for every single thing that you do in the app And you can be as crazy with that or as simple with that as you want when you're looking back at things, or keeping your own personal notes somewhere else if you happen to do that. So we could add a production buffer to say, hey, like we want to, give an extra 5% so that when we create this batch, we have 5% extra just in case for overfill or whatever it is. I'm going to leave it at 0 and be optimistic. I don't have any notes for this batch, but we could keep that here too. So when I click continue, I'll get this review page. I can look at what is this 4 candle batch going to require, and we can see that it requires 4 containers, 8 wicks because they're double wicks, fragrance oil, and 39 grams. MoonLite does all that math for us based on our design, which had a 5% fragrance load, and a specific amount of wax of each kind. Since we're only 25% C3, that's 194 grams versus 583 grams. I'm going to create the batch now. So this is the batch page. We're looking at the specifics of this. So if we were to create a cut sheet for the day and like say this is what we're going to work on, we could print this page out, or we could look at this page, and this would be a reference for what we need to do like that day. And we can measure out all of our ingredients and create our candles, which are pre-identified for us here with unique IDs, 1025-1, 2, 3, and 4. When I've finished, if I was perfect, I wouldn't have to do anything. But sometimes when you create a batch, you use a little too much, or you ran out of fragrance oil or something like that. We could make those adjustments here as well for this batch by clicking update batch and making adjustments to the wax and fragrance oil that we used. We'll assume perfection because that's our standard here. But now, how do we use this to test our candles? We can go into MoonLite and view these candles that we created from this batch and track them. Like presumably we've created a label on the candle itself to do that. From here, on the actual candle page, I can take a look at everything that's kind of estimated about this candle based on our design, and I can create notes that are specific for this candle. Let's pretend that we were testing this candle. In the notes section for this candle alone, I could identify things like, hey, today at 2 p.m. test went well. I'm highly simplifying what I would put in a real test notes, but you kind of get the picture. Like over time, we could start to develop pretty comprehensive notes in one place. And what's really good about this, test failed, I'll save these changes, is if I go to the candles page in MoonLite, I can see all the candles that I've created with MoonLite. I can search for certain things. If I search for the word failed, 1025-2, the one we just created, where we typed candle failed, shows up in this. And if I click into it, I'll get to the same page that I was at before. Now, to kind of round out the ability to kind of identify these candles, we've created a badge system. And this is a little early. Like we plan on improving this. But with badges, I can say, just generally, this candle passed or it failed. And that's for testing. Maybe I sold it, or maybe I really like the color, the hot throw. And these are quick little references that I have as the candle maker to see what, without having to like remember things about these candles or read the notes. I can just see these badges at a glance when I go into the candle page itself. So let's say that we want to create a recipe, but we don't know what wick size. This is normal, right? It's like we're going to start a new design. We're not sure what wick. We know what wax. We know all of that. To jumpstart that, I'm going to duplicate this recipe. We'll call this Genesis 2, real creative. But let's say that we don't know our wick. We're not going to include it in the design because it's unknown. We don't know what we want. I'm going to move it down to a single for simplicity, and I'll create this recipe. So this recipe doesn't know what wick it needs. So when I create a new batch, I'll have an opportunity to select a batch size and put different wicks for each of the candles that I'm going to be creating. And this kind of lets me get around a lot of different testing things without having to know anything going in, which allows me to tie everything back to that original recipe without duplicating all of the notes all over the place. So this will tell me when I do a review for this batch, that I'm going to need these different wicks, and then there's the wax and fragrance oil. Let's actually make it a five size batch. Eco 2, CD4, CD6, Eco 4, CD8. Here we can see that there's a different set of numbers because the batch size is one candle bigger. When I create this batch and I go to the candles for this batch, I'll now see that there is a different wick associated with each of them. So as I'm testing, I don't have to write it on my label anymore. As long as I have this 1026-5 ID written on my candle somewhere, I can easily reference what I'm doing here. Now, something to pay attention to when you're creating a batch. One important set of notes that I like to pay attention to is the idea that, how well performing was this batch? Did I cure these candles, this entire batch of candles, did I cure them in the right room? Did I pour these things? Those instructions are the kinds of things that you would put in the notes section of the batch itself, kind of these operational instructions or explanations of things that you did. So we could say that, we hit a max temp of 200 degrees Fahrenheit. We poured at 165 degrees Fahrenheit, etc. These are the kind of things that you can track in your batch notes. And that makes it extremely easy to go back to candles that worked well and to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit to see in our process what kinds of things did we do that we worked well. Like what kind of behaviors do we want to replicate? So if 1026-5 was a great candle, we passed our test, we really like that CD8, seems a little big, but we really like the CD8, we can say, well, this batch, it came from this batch, and in this batch, we did these two things. Max temp 200, we poured at 165, something there must be working right. Maybe we could also say that we had a room temp of 70 degrees Fahrenheit. We can refer to those things and then learn more about our process by studying the candles that go well, and everything's just kind of tied to each other. From a batch, I can look at all the candles, I can look at the recipe. From the recipe page, I can look at the batches that have been created from it. I can look at all the candles that belong to this recipe. And over time, I can build this catalog and this library of things that inform me and my processes of how to make these candles better. And it's all digital. And it's all also very mobile friendly. So I can run on the go in my workshop with my phone and do all the same things here. So that's MoonLite. That's kind of like what we're talking about when we talk about systematizing our records and aligning things so that it's a lot more efficient and a lot more effective and very searchable. It's like your own database of candles. You can search these things and track where you're going. That's all I have for you. I hope you make beautiful candles. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.